L.A. Gentlemen, busy day here. Good morning.
What's going on? How y'all doing?
All right, guys, let's get right into it here. We begin with some major news involving the world of college hoops. Yahoo Sports is reporting Markelle Fultz, the #1 overall pick in last year's NBA draft, and Dennis Smith, who was a lottery pick by the Mavericks last year, are among dozens of players listed on an agency's financial records indicating they received benefits that included cash advances and expenses from ASM sports teams, with players who allegedly received payments include basketball powerhouses such as Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky, Michigan State, and Kansas. Michigan State's Miles Bridges, Alabama's Collin Sexton, and Duke's Wendell Carter were also named in this report. It is great to have college basketball insider Jeff Goodman with us now to join the convo. Hi, Jeff.
How are you? Good to be with you. I'm not sure under these circumstances, but certainly good to be with you.
We certainly appreciate it. But Stephen A., I actually want to start with you here because you said earlier in the week Louisville was the first domino to fall. What's your reaction to the latest?
I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked at all. And I think there's more information that's going to come out. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Anytime you go after a guy like Rick Pitino and you ultimately nab him for something, even though that didn't involve, I mean, the FBI investigation is still ongoing as it pertains to Louisville, obviously. But when you consider some of the things that have happened to a big name like a Rick Pitino, and then you hear the kind of things that you've been hearing coming down the pike, you know, nothing should surprise you at this point. The FBI is involved. This is not about the NCAA. This is the FBI. We all know that the NCAA is the most reactionary commodity maybe ever in existence, for crying out loud. They wait until somebody brings the hammer down to react and all of a sudden play sanctimonious. That's just their M.O. But the FBI doesn't give 2 cents about that, and they're going after everybody. Let's look at the names on this list. Let's pay attention to this stuff. We've got Tom Izzo, because Miles Bridges, when you're talking about Miles Bridges, you're talking about Michigan State. And if you're talking about Michigan State, you're talking about Tom Izzo. Now, that's a problem in and of itself, considering what has transpired with Michigan State. But then you got Calipari. His name is in there. You got Roy Williams for North Carolina. That name is in there because he's North Carolina. And, of course, Mike Krzyzewski. I mean, when you talk about if something happens where Mike Krzyzewski and Duke's basketball program is ultimately implicated to a strong degree, with a strong degree of credibility, I can't imagine what something like this would do to college basketball. Clearly, the belief is by some people out there that this is much ado about nothing, because if it were just one program, that would be different. But because there's a plethora of it, it sort of softens the blow. But I kind of disagree with that from this respect. College basketball is already in trouble. We used to love the season. Now all we seem to care about is March Madness. And anytime further negative publicity comes down the pike, it doesn't help the sport, particularly when some of the big names, who are the kind of individuals that are so revered and held in such high regard by the media and the public at large, if they start falling like dominoes too, who knows what this is going to do to college basketball. And that's just where I'm at with it. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm not surprised at all. And the people who get implicated, make no mistake about it, because the FBI is involved, they're going to start singing. And the Jeff Goodmans of the world and others are going to be boatloaded with information out the wazoo, because everybody's going to be looking to cover their you-know-what. This is just the beginning.
Stephen A., I think you touched on what would be the kind of most salacious stuff about this whole story, is if it implicated ultimately brand name coaches. And you were talking about that, or alluding to it a couple days ago, in fact. That would be like, oh, yes, my God. Now, I understand why people would feel that way. By the way, you could Google Sam Gilbert. You know, you talk about the greatest college basketball dynasty ever with the most upstanding coach, John Wooden, right? Google Sam Gilbert. Tell me what you think about that. You know, how he was a booster for the Bruins back then. And, you know, obviously there were improper benefits and all that kind of stuff. Wooden was never implicated. You know, and so if they have a smoking gun here, it remains to be seen whether that smoking gun can be linked to the institutions, not just to an agency who paid players, and then the players wound up at those institutions, and then if that can be linked to the coaches. because the coaches usually have plausible deniability. But that would be the kind of most scandalous thing, I think, to come out of that. But, you know, my general feeling, Jeff, about all this stuff is this is not the corruption. This is a symptom of the corruption. That's why a lot of people get a kick out of it or roll their eyes like, duh, we don't know that players are paid. For example, when Cam Newton, you know, was being courted after Florida, right? Mississippi State was busted, right, on a recording. On a recording, and I think the number was $180,000, right? He winds up at Auburn. Don't you think most college football fans think, did they get him for free? Not to accuse Auburn of anything, but that's what most fans are thinking. Wait, this place is offering almost $200,000 and he winds up at that place. Was that just for the education or just for the program? So it's not, fans are jaded about this stuff, and that is because the corruption begins when you point a camera at unpaid labor. When you point that camera at them and start selling commercial time and charging money for tickets, that is the corruption. After that, it's a symptom of that corruption. And I think people largely see the student athletes, even the agents and the coaches, as actors in that drama, but not as the root causes of the corruption.
Jeff?
You know, there's so much to wrap your arms around, and both of you are right. I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg, okay? Now, I will say, some of the stuff in this with Andy Miller, the documentation, none of it surprises me because you've got other agents doing similar things, okay? Agents are trying to do what? They're trying to get these players. By doing that, they're paying money. They're paying money to them when they're in high school, when they're in college. But a lot of this information in this document, listen, it's meals. Miles Bridges got $400 or his family. Is that a big deal, Stephen A? At the end of the day, a meal to Wendell Carter's parents? No. It's the big money, and it's the other things that may come out from this investigation. Remember, they wired all of these 10 people that were arrested. They wired for months. What else is going to come out from the conversations between coaches, Christian Dawkins, who was working for Andy Miller at the time, trying to get all these players for Andy Miller, making money off them? What is going to come out with these coaches and Dawkins? That, to me, is going to be what hits hardest. Not what came out today, but what's going to come out through the FBI investigation.
Well, Jeff, I've got a couple of questions for you because obviously you cover the sport religiously and you're the resident expert here. Let me ask you a couple of questions here, sir. Number one, if we're talking about payment to players, isn't it true that we're not just talking about payments from an agent, but in all probability, we could potentially be talking about programs. We could potentially be talking about former players from programs that are now in the NBA that have been utilized to funnel money to these players. Is that not true? Because that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, you can get it in so many different ways. Cheating has changed. Now it can be former players. It can be shoe companies. It can be financial guys. It's very rare that you're going to find a head coach with their fingerprints on a payment going from them or the school to a player or to a family anymore. It's gotten more complicated than that.
It's interesting. This is my second question because I want to know the significance of this. I've seen a couple of names on here, and Max, you read this as well. It wasn't just Dennis Smith. You've got Fred VanVleet. You've got Kyle Kuzma in here with a couple of loans. It's a few other guys, okay? So I'm looking at stuff like that. But let me ask you this. The one thing that stood out in my mind, Jeff, was this. The FBI intercepted 4,000 calls over the course of 330 days. So what I'm wondering is that if that happened, and we're talking about, even though this was dating back from a couple of years ago or what have you, listen, if the FBI got involved and they intercepted 4,000 calls over 330 days, we're talking about potential coach involvement because, again, they got one in Rick Pitino, albeit for different reasons. We know what's coming down the pipe with the FBI in Louisville. We see the programs that have been mentioned, and we also know big-time players who are on the next level who came from this program. How fearful are you getting in terms of just gauging the tenor of the situation? How fearful do folks appear to be at this particular moment in time with you covering this sport in light of what the FBI is putting out there?
I mean, my phone right now will not stop. I mean, coaches calling, everybody calling, agents, everybody is fearful because think about it. If Christian Dawkins, you dealt with him on any level and you know his wire, you know, his phone was tapped or any of these guys involved, you are worried about that conversation and what you said. And Andy Miller, I want to get this across to people. With Andy Miller, this was an agent that, as you mentioned earlier, Stephen A., you know, Carolina, Kentucky with Bam Adebayo, you know, all these schools are listed in this report today. Some coaches worked with Andy Miller, okay, to help secure players. And then in return, Andy Miller had a stable of AAU coaches, okay? He had these AAU guys who had players and controlled players. So Andy Miller had some control over these players at a young age. He would funnel them to some college coaches, and in return, the deal would be, you make sure I get him back. Now, there might have been some other financial aspect of it, but that was the primary way it worked. Other coaches couldn't stand Andy Miller. I used to get complaints all the time about how he would come on campus, deal with their players, deal with the players' parents, try to get them to leave early. A lot of these players, he convinced to leave early even if they weren't lottery picks, first-round picks. They'd be second-round picks. They'd leave early in a time 3-4 years ago when that wasn't as common as it is today. So, you know, again, you look at the document today, I think, as you said, it's going to be way bigger what's to come from the wiretaps than what we saw today.
Last point, and then I'll let Max and Molly get back in here. I remember George Raveling calling out LeVar Ball because he had a problem with, you know, LeVar Ball and the way he was conducted. Because I'm thinking about how LeVar Ball is looking right now because you've got George Raveling, you got Nike, you've got, you know, ASM Sports. You know, not that Nike was implicated in this. That's not what I'm trying to imply. I'm just saying the sneaker companies, the agents, etc. We'll find all of this out over the course of time. But when somebody like LeVar Ball is called out by George Raveling, how ridiculous does that make George Raveling, the George Ravelings of the world and others look right now in light of a controversy like this?
Yeah, I mean, they're all self-serving. What do they want? They work for Nike. They work for Adidas. They work for Under Armour. So they want Lonzo Ball under their umbrella, where LeVar Ball, as you said, listen, maybe he made the right move here because he's probably going to end up unscathed, and the Ball family name will probably end up unscathed from all this because of his decision to say no to all these shoe companies that were throwing a ton of money at him, where everybody else right now is fearful of what they did. Or maybe, you know, again, a lot of coaches that are clean or perceived to be clean are calling me right now saying, this is the greatest thing for the sport because it's going to clean it up. I still think it's going to take more time before that happens, and I don't think it ever cleans it up. But I think now what we need to look at is, should we allow players coming out of high school in college to have agents going into the NBA? And I think it's something that I think will eventually happen.
Mm-hmm. Just the beginning of this story. Jeff, we appreciate you. We know it's a very busy day. Your insight. Yeah, Stephen A., you want to jump in quick?
I just want to jump in before Jeff gets off the air and let you know my phone's been blowing up. My phone's been blowing up as well. And this is from folks within the NBA, not even just the NCAA. And what they're saying is that everyone is nervous as hell right now because of those 4,000 calls intercepted by the FBI, Max, Molly, and Jeff knows this. Just think about the conversations that take place, the things that are said and could be implied.
All
the
these
FBI
coaches
has intercepted 4,000 calls over 330 days. Folks are scared as hell right now. They're scared and they should be.
All these coaches and members of these institutions, it's like, you know, everyone speeds, right? Who doesn't do better than the speed limit? And you just don't want to be the one who the cops pull over. You know, they have to enforce the rules, so someone's going to get pulled over. And that, more than anything, is what I took away from what Rick Pitino was saying publicly. If you listen to subtext, he didn't seem credible in terms of his denial. But the subtext, it seemed to me, is, guys, I'm playing by the rules, the same rules everyone else is playing by.
Yeah. Nerves are sky high. No surprise there. Jeff Goodman, thank you so much.
You got it, guys.
Thank you, Jeff.
We'll have much more on this later in the show. But coming up, the NBA finally back last night, and boy, did it deliver. Do the fellas think Russell Westbrook showed the Thunder have what it takes out west? And Chef Curry cooking. Are his Warriors about to flip the switch and put the league on notice once again? All that up next.
Only two types of people have ever existed. Those